Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Find out what it takes to truly discover what it takes to elevate your career within payroll as we meet with the industry leaders who are shaping the industry for tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to today's September edition of Payroll Question Time. We've got a new Prime Minister, a new Pensions Minister, a new Chancellor. All has taken place since our last PQT. And with all these new appointments, we've seen so many announcements be made that we're all going to have a huge impact on payroll. And we're going to try and run through all of those through today's show. The government, of course, has released a growth plan for the UK that's focused on cutting costs and simplifying policies, not necessarily simplifying the process for payroll professionals, though. One key change that's going to impact me as a payroll recruiter is, of course, the repealing of the off-payroll working rules, known as R35. So we'll be talking about that later on in the show. We've also heard the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, announce that the 1.25 percentage point increase in national insurance will be reversed from the 6th of November. In addition to the reverse of this year's increase to NI, next year's health and social care levy of 1.25% due to be introduced from April 23 will also not go ahead, also as part of the government's growth plans. That means the payslip messaging we've talked about loads on the show over the last few episodes won't necessarily be needed because it's not going to be applicable. And of course, the real living wage has also increased, £10.90 an hour, a £1 increase in the UK, and £11.95 in London, a 90p increase as costs of living increase as well. That's almost 400,000 people working for over 11,000 real living wage employers throughout the country are going to receive a vital cost of living pay boost to support workers and families. Meanwhile, aside from all the government announcements, we've also seen the CIPP release its annual Future of Payroll report, and we have Sam joining us for the first time today from the CIPP. Now, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick Day. I'm host of the Payroll Podcast. I'm a Reward 300 member, and I'm founder of JGA Recruitment, which is a specialist payroll recruitment company. I've been in the industry now for 2 decades. I love it. I'm passionate about it. I love this show. That's enough about me. I'd love to introduce you all to our fantastic panel, of which we have a new guest for the first time. So I'm going to start with Sam O'Sullivan, Policy Lead from the CIPP. I wonder if you could introduce yourself, Sam.
Hi, thank you, Nick, and thank you so much for having me on today's show. So, as Nick said, my name's Sam O'Sullivan, and I'm the current policy lead at the CIPP. I've been with the CIPP from the back end of March and really enjoyed my time there. As Nick said, lots to keep us occupied at the moment, lots of changes that we've all got to get our heads around. So hopefully we can clarify any kind of concerns that you've got on today's show. Thanks, Nick.
Fantastic. And moving far as I look at it from right to left, Andy Nichols, our resident pensions expert and industry liaison manager from the pensions regulator. Andy.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's good. Looking forward to our chat, really, about all the wonders that the government have given us to consider. Isn't it good? My background's all payroll, hence it's nice to be able to blend the payroll and the pensions together and understand it from what is the impact on payroll because of this and everything else, of course. That's me.
And of course, if you have any pensions questions, put them in the chat box as well. We'll have Andy here to answer those for you as we go through. And last but by no means least, Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance at SD Worx. Introduce yourself, Simon.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. I've been in the industry now since 1984, Nick, so a little while. I think my third stint here at SD Worx has been for the past 25 and a half years. And I deal with the compliance of our solutions and interactions with government. Also sit on a number of government panels, as does Sam to a certain extent. So we are part of the Employer Payroll Group and others. I chair the BCS Payroll Specialist Group and Irene, and I'm a Reward 300 member, similar to yourself, Nick.
Fantastic. Well, let's move on through then and let you all know what our today's topics are going to be, which won't be a surprise to many of you. I'll let Simon catch up with the slides. But we're going to be talking today about the growth plans. Obviously, some of those announcements I mentioned in the introduction. In particular, we're going to talk about national insurance and how it impacts us from November 2022, the health and social care levy, simplification of income tax, off-payroll workers and IR35, the real living wage and real hours, and there'll be some hot topics, if we have time, we'd like to run through as well. But before we jump into the first bit, let's get everyone active, let's get everyone listening and involved. We're going to launch or try and launch our first poll. Now, I'm going to let you all know I've never launched a poll on this system before, so let's hope that it works. I'm going to try and launch it now. The question for all of you is, did you provide paid leave for the Queen's funeral bank holiday? You have 3 options here. You may select one, either yes, no, or don't know. And while we wait for those results to come through, I'm going to just tackle our first question. So thank you for already putting it into the box. And we'll wait for those results. I'm going to ask you this, Simon, if I can. I'm going to get straight in there with a query. I'm wondering how the Class 1A NIC will be calculated on P11 values for this tax year, considering the changes in the additional 1.25% applied for NI and then being removed from November onwards. I'm going to mention that now because we're about to jump into NI. So, Simon, I wonder if you could tackle that question for us. So P11D, of course.
Yeah, in relation to P11D, this is an interesting area, and the operation of having 5 months of 13.8% and 7 months of 15.05% results in the tax year 2022-23 having what's called a blended employer's national insurance contribution. That blended rate, which is 14.53%, will apply to Class 1A on benefits in kind and Class 1B. It doesn't apply to Class 1A real time on termination and sporting testimonials. That is point in time application only and reverts back to 13.8%. So the real time payroll calculation of Class 1A doesn't relate to benefits at all or PSA. That relates to termination and sporting testimonials only, the amounts over £30,000 in the case of termination payments. So take care with that. Benefits are judged at the rate applicable at the end of the tax year and reported on the P11DB form as an adjustment value if you're payrolling, or from the P11D, it'll carry forward to the P11DB form at the rate of 14.53% for this tax year. And then next tax year, 23-24, it'll revert back to 13.8%. So hopefully that helps. But Class 1A terminations, Class 1A benefits in kind are totally different and separate liabilities.
Perfect. So thank you ever so much, Jess, for getting straight in there with your first question. Now we've got the poll results. I'm going to come to you, Sam, with these. Hopefully not surprising for everybody, but 95% said yes. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, as I would have expected, in all honesty, Nick. So with your statutory bank holidays of your 5.6 weeks, obviously if there are any additional days, so this year we had the Queen's Jubilee and the Queen's funeral bank holiday, you would not have to give those extra days off. It doesn't form part of the statutory entitlement. However, I think most employers did do that. So I'm not surprised by those results. It's as I would have expected.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump back in. I know everyone's keen to get involved in these growth plans. We're going to hide those away. We're going to move across into the slides. Let's talk straight in about national insurance. So a few things to cover off here. We've got national insurance directors, blended Class 1A terminations and more. I'm going to come to you, Simon, to begin with. Just give us a bit of an overview of the things we need to consider here and for everyone that's joined us and how these growth plans really do impact payroll.
Yeah, and it's going to be a mixed message a little bit, Nick, because the general principle of national insurance is it's due at the rates applicable at the point of payment. And certainly we were seeing people questioning whether earnings paid in April, for example, but worked in March, whether they should be on March rates or April rates. And lots of those sorts of scenarios have very little relevance. The application point for national insurance is when did you pay it, not when did you earn it. And so in most cases, so there's an element of that principle applies. So the national insurance change is from November the 6th onwards, is at the new rate. But if you pay it on November the 5th, which would just happen to be a Saturday, you actually do it on the current rates, the higher.
I'm going to jump in quickly, Simon. I've had a quick question that relates exactly to that, and I think this you probably answered it, but I'll make sure that we do so we're not repeating content. Sure. I've got a question that says, are we able then to ask our employees if they wish to delay our existing monthly payroll or monthly bonuses and ask them if they would rather be paid on the 7th so we can provide our employers with the NI reductions that are effective from the 6th of November?
I'm not going to answer the question, Nick. I think that's an interesting point that a number of people will raise, but you'll need to decide whether that's contriving some sort of avoidance. So the answer is possibly. Does that help a bit? This is where we go back to the disclaimer, and it's sort of, was that consideration made by a number of employers when the rate went up this year? I know it was, because I haven't provided advice either way. So some people did pay, for example, bonuses early to avoid the increase. Should they, could they? I think you need to seek your own legal advice. But potentially, the principle is it's point of payment. So that might infer that you can.
Sam, so I wonder if you could just take it a little bit further and talk about how this impacts directors blended, and maybe just take the conversation through the next bullet point for us.
Yeah, so I know Simon's touched on the blended element of the NI for Class 1As and Class 1Bs. Essentially, the same is going to apply for your directors. It's going to be a blended rate. So we know that for employees, you pay NI and you pay it on the day that you pay it, and it's not cumulative. Whereas with directors, it can be cumulative. So they have also created a blended rate for directors as well. And Simon, you'll be able to clarify these rates, but the rates will be for earnings above the PT up to the UEL. It's going to be 12.73%. Anything over the UEL, it's 2.73%. That's for the director themselves, the employee. For the employer's contributions, it's all the 14.53%. Have I got that right, Simon?
Absolutely, Sam. Of course you would, wouldn't you? But I wouldn't expect anything else. I guess the interesting thing with directors, you think, will directors leave? They start mid-year, etc. Oh, and we operate the alternate method. And the reality is, I think, Sam, at some point in the year, an annual method is required by law to be applied. That might be March, or it might be the period they left, if earlier. But even for a director using the alternate method, you must do an annual reconciliation type calculation and deal with the differences at some point, either the last payment or the last payment in the tax year, or their directorship, if you're not paying them anymore. So it's going to be interesting. Plus, many will say, well, the director left in July. What do I do? Yeah, the requirement is that the blended rate will apply for the 2022-23 tax year. So those that have already gone will require a recalculation.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned in my introduction as well, we've also seen the removal of the health and social care levy. So I wondered if you could bring us up to speed on those changes, Simon.
Yeah, sure. So the increase of 1.25% to employees and employers' national insurance was to cover the health and social care levy for this year, but it was meant to be introduced as a separate tax. So next year, everything was going to go back to how we're having it from the 9th of November, if you could say. And for next year, there was going to be a new tax liability for both employees and employers of this 1.25. Liz Truss and her hustings wanted to get rid of this, so she promised that she'd get rid of it, and it's repealed. So there will not be any health and social care levy in 23-24 tax year. It's gone.
And I think if I read correctly, and I think I mentioned in the introduction, Sam, that means it's going to have an impact on the payroll or payslip messaging as well.
Yeah, so obviously we've got the payslip messaging at the moment, which I know there's been lots of discussions around as to whether people wanted to use it, whether they liked it or not. So, for those that didn't like it, we can park it come November because we're losing that payslip message. It's no longer needed. However, employers might want to put a different payslip message on there to say your national insurance rates have changed. Be mindful of this. I think when change is implemented in payroll, one of the main impacts is the number of queries that get sent through to your payroll department or your agent that's processing your payroll. So if you can let employees know that there is a difference on a payslip one, it prevents the queries, and two, it empowers the employees to know why there is a difference. So I think employers should think about putting a new payslip message on, one which they create and they can choose the wording to inform individuals why their NI has changed come the 6th of November.
Perfect. And of course, if anyone has any questions about national insurance changes or health and social care levy being removed, do put it in the questions box while we're on this subject, and we'll try and answer those questions as we go. And last but not least, on our slide here, I've got a question for Andy to come after this. The creation of investment zones. I wonder if you could just bring that up to speed for us, Simon.
Yeah, sure. So part of the announcements of the growth plan 2022, because we didn't have a mini budget, we didn't have a budget, it was the growth plan announcements, was the creation of investment zones. These seem as if they're very similar to the Freeport type concept and a number of councils are being in discussion about setting up development areas where they want employment to grow, which in effect brings in an ability for an employer for a new employment to not have to pay national insurance contributions, secondary national insurance contributions, for earnings up to £50,000 or 50,272 would be a precise. They don't state that value, but it's similar with veterans. It's 50,000. £270. Sorry, I get the values wrong. And we're waiting to hear more details, but I suspect this will bring in probably another 1 to 3 NIC category letters. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know when it's going to start, but they're actually negotiating, discussing, whatever, with local authorities about a new creation of investment zones that allow these tax reliefs for employers and brings in a national insurance concession.
Perfect. Now, I know that Sam, the CRPP, worked very closely with the HMRC on consultations, other bits and pieces. Anything you can add to that?
There isn't really, but I've got a question for Simon. Do you think they're going to add a new secondary threshold like they did with the FUST and the VUST to accommodate this?
That would be a disaster, wouldn't it, if they did? Yes. Well, and Sam will know we've had lots of discussions with HMRC policy, national insurance wise, through the representative groups such as British Computer Society Payroll Specialists Group and IRENE, because the EP5 specification required the insertion of a FUST into all NI calculations. And I think that caused some angst with training, because to actually do a manual equivalent would be very difficult, because the FUST has got nothing to do with anybody apart from Freeport's. And the oddity about it is that although the EB5 specification tells software it has to insert the FUST, and guidance was telling us it had to be inserted in all calculations, the law didn't. And they've actually conceded that actually if you calculate in accordance with the law, you're okay. And actually the tables don't either. And it was conceded actually that the table method calculations are not defined in law at all. So the £4 steps that you get on monthly, nowhere in law does it say that's allowed. It's something that was invented back in the old DHSS days, I guess, of simplifying things for payroll, is to do these £4 and £1 roundings, and has just carried on with tradition. So there has been concession. So let's hope there won't be, I don't know what we call them. I was saying it as ZUST, should we call them, or something like that, inserted. And at the moment, it looks like it's going to align itself with the upper secondary threshold and the veterans' upper secondary threshold as well. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare.
I'm going to loop Andy in just for now as well. We've got a new pensions minister, of course. So I just wonder if there's any impact on pensions that these growth announcements have had on any of this we've discussed so far, or whether is it a little bit too soon? I'll ask you the question. So anything we need to know on the pension side following the new appointment of a new pensions minister?
Yeah, well, obviously the new pensions minister needs a bit of time to settle in, I guess, and work out what he would like to concentrate and focus on. Alex Burghardt. We'll wait and see. Obviously, the regulator, DVP, and everyone else will be chatting away to find out those things. I think from a purely pensions perspective, I think the announcement of growth plan and the impact that had on the financial markets means that TPR have been monitoring what's going on there, because particularly for DB schemes, where they've got investments in government bonds, and if those start, there's an impact, and so it's good the Bank of England did their announcement to start to put stability back into the financial markets to help trustees feel more at ease as to the future of their liquidity, as they like to call it, of the pension scheme. So that's good. In terms of national insurance, there's not really a big impact from a pension perspective. I think it's more about the tax thing, but I think that's going to come up in the slide or so. Yes. So I think watch this space in terms of pensions and see what the minister focuses on, because there's a lot of projects.
We'll talk about the pension implications of tax in just a moment. Let's jump into tax in just a second. Before I do, I want to get everyone involved in our next poll, because we know that all the software providers are going to be quickly changing their systems to be updated for these changes. I'd like to know if everyone is ready from a payroll perspective for the changes. So let me see if I can launch this second poll. Do you think you can implement national insurance changes by November? Answers are yes, all covered, I need to know more, or no. So they can launch that poll and see how the results come in there. Please, everyone can answer their answers here. While we're waiting for those responses, I'll introduce what the next section is going to be, because we are going to be talking about growth plan and tax. We're going to be talking about the simplification of income tax, the 19% basic rate, the abolition of the 45% rate. We've had a question related to that already, dividends and pension implications as well, which Andy just talked about very briefly. So at the moment, the results are coming in. Let's have a look what we've got here. Let's launch these results. So we've got 50% yes, all covered, 25% need to know more, and 25% no. So if you do need to know more and you have any questions you want to put in the box, do put them in. We have a chance to try and answer those now. But wondered, Sam, if you could just comment on these results as they stand at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that half of us think we can get it all implemented in time, right? I'd like to know what people need to know more on. And like you say, Nick, ask any questions and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. I think with payroll, you need to know what's going on, but you always, like you said, you rely on the software being able to do it for you. But the key thing that I would say to anyone processing a payroll, whether you are an agent or whether you are a payroll professional, get your head around the changes in the first instance. The last thing you want is your system to malfunction. Hopefully that would never happen, and you not know how to manually calculate everything. So get your head around everything, and hopefully then you would see that yes, all covered skyrocket to 100%.
Super. And I just had a couple of comments. I may have closed that poll slightly early, so apologies if you were keen to get your response in but didn't quite make it. But Barbara mentioned she would have ticked yes, just to put it slightly over that 50% mark had we got there. But let's jump into the tax implications. I know this is something that we're keen to get into, and the implications of the announcements, the growth plan announcements on tax. Let's begin with the simplification of income tax. And I'll come back to you, Simon, just to give us an introduction to that, if we may.
Well, this is the justification that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are making, is that they want this simplification. But there are other implications with that. Interesting, I've been a committee member of the Office of Tax Simplification, the one that worked on the introducing of payrolling of benefits in kind. So I've been involved with this organisation. But in effect, they've given notification that the Office of Tax Simplification will end. And then they want that to be a name of HMRC, which is interesting. I always thought, careful what I say, I'm thinking here, Sam, I always thought HMRC always had a goal for simplification, but the goal was for them rather than anybody else. We just had to deal with the complexities. So was that a bit cynical? But there's an element of hopefully we will see. But actually, having spoken with the Minister last week, I think there is a goal that's the new Economic Secretary who's responsible for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and that responsibility has changed from what was the Financial Secretary, so it has changed Minister who's responsible for it. He is wanting to simplify things for business, so there is an opportunity to try and move ahead. But some of these proposals were part of that, and well, I guess we'll discuss those, won't we? But we'll see where it goes.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Sam?
I know that the OTS have got a call for evidence out at the moment on hybrid working. We have been notified that they're bringing the closing date of that call for evidence forward to the 28th of October. I think it was sat at the 25th of November. So if there is anyone that's attending that wants to respond to that, they've brought the closing date forward to the 28th of October.
Fantastic. Interestingly, and this is from a recruitment perspective, I've seen a lot of companies introduce the 4-day week from the 5-day week. But since that's happened, I've also seen some scramble to try and go back to 5 days, and it's quite complicated. So sometimes we'll make those decisions very early, thinking it's a great thing, and then of course we get it thrown into economic turmoil, and everyone wonders if it's the right decision. So just that's a recruitment observation from my side, working with clients. But it's been interesting to watch these things on a much broader scale. I wonder if you could just bring us up to speed then, Sam, on the 19% basic rate and how that's going to impact payroll.
Yeah, so the 19% basic rate tax. So our previous Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, pledged in his spring statement that he would reduce the basic rate of income tax to 19% from April 2024. However, the growth plan has brought that forward a year. So from April 2023, the basic rate of income tax will be reduced to 19%. So it's coming in a year earlier than pledged.
Fantastic. I'm just going to put out a little note here that Ros Hendren's very well spotted. We always imagine payroll people to have great attention to detail. It's now His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And that's sorry if I was me that made that slip up, but a good observation nonetheless. It was probably me. So great that was. I knew it's something like that. So I always had great attention to detail. So we'll try and correct that for the rest of the show.
The other challenge here, Nick, and maybe where Andy's maybe got some thoughts, is people may have been making decisions, certainly on salary sacrifice pension contributions, on the fact that they topped up their contributions because of the increase in health and social care levy on national insurance, because they get national insurance relief as well. And of course, that's all kind of wiped away.
Any commentary there, Andy?
Obviously, we discussed the basic rate bit, and we've discussed the issues on the marketplace. As Simon was saying, people's salary sacrifice, they may have chosen from April to go salary sacrifice because of the extra employer and employee 1.25%, etc. on national insurance, but it's still a great saving in terms of national insurance. So salary sacrifice is still a good approach, really, in that respect. I think we just got to watch the space, really, haven't we, to see what is the implications on the basic rate tax. That's the big one, I think, from a pensions perspective, from a payroll pensions perspective, anyway.
Dealing with that on the sacrifice amount, with dividends and directors, I'm not sure there is so much an impact, unless, well, actually, except again, I guess a director could have been voting through higher employer contributions on a basis that they wouldn't pay them as much in dividends. But I think it's all a bit of the same thing, is it, Andy? Do you think it's that? I think there's an element of, Nick, these changes, 9th of November and 6th of April 2023, may be decision points for people to review what they want to do and whether they want to change their mind. Equally, I guess that impacts the fact that, well, I don't know how your fuel bills are, but my fuel company is wanting to up my DD by 200%. Don't know why, because I've never had a bill that high, and even if you doubled, it wouldn't be. But I think it's because they just like to hold money. How are people going to affect it? And I know there's some commentary, even on social media, the fact that people might consider that they need to dip in to maybe their pension savings or reduce just to survive the winter. I don't know. Is that too wide and too speculative, Andy, to comment on?
Well, we would be concerned if employers are under stress, or individuals particularly, with all the cost of living increases, would be thinking, no, maybe I need to stop paying into my pension, which could be a contribution holiday. So they just say, can I not pay for 3 months? But we would still expect the employer to pay, but maybe the employer's in financial stress, So if that is the situation, that you've got employees who are struggling to cope, then they should speak to their employer, the employer should speak to the pension provider and see what can be done. As long as the motivation isn't about inducement or coercion of stopping contributions, as in it's actually about trying to survive type thing. So the individual is making those decisions. There's no external influence on them. Then that's just how life is. And we wouldn't be looking to pursue intervention because the employer seems to be trying to persuade people to come out of the scheme so they can save the employer contribution. So we are concerned that the current economic climate may reduce contributions into pension schemes, which is going to affect people's long-term ability to live well. But if employers are in distress, they should come and speak to TPR. Sure. And if employees are in distress, speak to your employer and the pension provider. Maybe take a contribution holiday and then start again as soon as you can.
It's good advice. But let's move the conversation forward then to the next aspect of the growth plan, which links to off-payroll working rules, also known as IR35, which are put in place for public from 6th of April 2023. A really interesting subject. We've talked about this at length over previous episodes. I know some companies, particularly recruitment firms like mine, have put a considerable amount of investment into making sure that we're managing IR35 compliantly and all our contractors are working compliantly and so on and so forth. It was introduced in 2017. We're going to see it scrapped, if I understand it correctly. Wonder if you could just bring us up to speed on these growth plan changes, Simon.
Sure. So again, this was a little bit of maybe a surprise, although there's been some heavy lobbying of government to get rid of them because it's kind of hated by the contractor market and that sort of position. And it's surprising actually how many public sector employers use this type of arrangement historically, although public sector have fallen under the 2017 aspect, like local authorities, etc. But some businesses probably suffered the walkout on April 2021 when it was brought in. So a series of IT contractors just didn't turn up anymore, but has caused a lot of contention, but very strong lobbying around. Now, the principle the government had, of course, was that lots of these personal service companies were only paying themselves minimal amounts to avoid paying tax and national insurance. That's their sort of view rather than my statement of what I believe, and that there were billions being lost to the exchequer. So they brought in these measures. Now the announcement may at face value look as if we're going back to how it used to be, but I don't think it is. I think what that means is the responsibility will now fall back to the individuals and it may well be policed heavier. The challenge with that, of course, is there's no employer NI liability being paid by the engager anymore. So it has saved that element of cost, but that may now fall on the responsibility of the contractor themselves. But this comes in on the 5th of April 2023, the abolition. So it still exists. And equally, it's when work is done. So there is potentially a carry forward. So we could say you don't need to do any more CEST checking from the 6th of April. And for any work done from the 6th of April, there isn't a liability to withhold tax and national insurance as an engager. But if they did the work on the 5th of April, and send in their invoice 2 years later, that fell before the abolition. So there is a requirement to withhold the tax and national insurance. And I guess that potentially that responsibility for late invoicing for work already done could occur for up to 4 years.
It is certainly something that I think, certainly in my sector in recruitment and for the contractors, not just that we work with, but with other recruiters that I'm in touch with, that they have much bigger contractor books than us in some sectors. They're kind of rejoicing at this change, but also equally frustrated that it's now been scrapped with the amount of investment and work that's gone into it. And equally, you mentioned at the start of this with contractors not turning up, but there were also a number of employers that immediately terminated all of their contractors until they'd been reassessed. So it impacted a number of contractors as well in different ways. But I think ultimately it's something that's been celebrated within the contractor and recruitment industries for sure. But there's a little bit of frustration there, certainly for those who put in a significant amount of investment to get themselves ready to now see it scrapped so soon. Oh, you mentioned that the responsibility now is with the PSC. I wonder if we could, maybe Sam, if you can just enlighten us in what that means.
Yeah, so I think the way I try to explain it is to put it into a bit of an example. So if I, Sam, work for Sam Limited, so it's my own limited company. Now it's my own responsibility to determine my employment tax status. So previously, let's say I worked for a really, really large company. Let's say I worked for Apple. Prior to the 6th of April next year, the rules were that they would determine my tax status. So they'd say, Sam's got a desk, she's got an email address, she's got a job title. For her tax status, she's an employee. And as Simon explained, they'd withhold tax and NI from my invoice value, so to speak. From April, I decide whether I'm an employee. So I could say that, well, no, I've determined my own working hours. I've determined my own rate of pay. Apple have agreed to it. I am a contractor. I'm not an employee. So through my own limited company, I'll pay myself minimum salary and large dividends. And that's great, as long as that is the truth. But that's also why the off-payroll working rules were implemented in the first instance. It's why they were implemented. You know, as part of the growth plan, they did say that they will keep compliance closely under review. I don't know how they're going to do that moving forward, but it'll be interesting to see what their plan for compliance is from April.
For sure. And we know as well, because we've had a number of PQTs about this. We've had John Keeble as our legal expert talking about R35 as well. But a number of payroll departments have really had to do a lot of work as well to make sure they're ready, to make sure sometimes they've recruited people in to help them with R35. So I'm going to run another poll here to see how many it actually did impact as our third and final poll for today, and that's to really find out if the off-payroll working was really worth the effort. Yes, it was easy, didn't really impact you in the payroll department, or perhaps it was a real pain and you didn't need to recruit people specifically for that task that's come out of your payroll budget and so on and so forth. You didn't have any that it impacted and therefore wasn't relevant for you, or perhaps you're still not familiar with what R35 is, and you wouldn't be alone in that either. It didn't impact everybody, and we were still some late adopters to it as well. So it'd be interesting to see what everyone's results are for this. I'm going to let the poll run a little bit longer than last time, so I think I closed it slightly too early, and there are still some people keen to vote. Of course, if you do have any questions on R35 and questions that you want to ask our panel, do put them in the questions box. We'll answer those in real time if we can. So if you have any questions, it could be about pensions, payroll. It doesn't even have to be about the topics we're discussing today. It could be about anything at all that impacts your payroll. Please do let us know, and we'll put those to the panel as they come in. I'm going to let this poll run just a little bit longer. I think we've had just over 60% of everybody vote so far. So if you haven't managed to put your response in there, even if you're not sure what it is, just answer it for us. We'll get the most accurate poll results that we can, and I'll close that poll in just a few seconds. I think Simon also has just logged off and logged back on with a few audio issues as well. So hopefully we'll have Simon back on the show in just a moment. So let's close this poll and see.
Yeah, I'm back.
Excellent. So I'm going to share these then, Simon. I know that we've just had Sam talk us about what the PSC bit means. So I wonder if you could perhaps have some commentary on the results. Yes, it was easy, was 18%. It was a pain. We recruited people for this, was 40%. We didn't have any that impacted 40%. And what is this was 2%. So a neck and neck tie for we didn't have any, or it was a pain and we recruited people for this.
Yeah, I think that's the dichotomy of it, isn't it? It was easy if you had none, and it was awful if you had some. In fact, I think it was the tool was very badly named. In fact, I have to be very careful in certain presentations because I don't want to use the word in whenever it's saying where you do this. So you can't say you do this in because it comes out very badly.
I would agree. It was a pain. I didn't recruit people for it, but, it was due to come in 2020. Then, sorry to say the C word, but COVID struck and it was delayed. So everyone had to get their head around it, ready for it to be implemented in April 2020. Then it was put on hold. Then it was implemented again. And now they're taking it away. So, it's just a lot for people to get their head around and another piece of change. But I presume that you would have ticked that box as well then, Nick. It was a pain.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, as similar to us as a recruitment firm, but for yourself as as in the policy team at CIPP, this is something that I imagine you put a lot of resource into understanding. Even if you didn't recruit people for it, getting your heads around it to advise others. It wasn't a simple thing to explain or to really get up to grips with. So I think a lot of time has been lost in just sort of understanding it, let alone actually implementing it. So overall, I think we're celebrating that. Well, we're celebrating as a recruiter that it's gone. It's been a frustration, shall we say. Let's jump into the real living wage anyway. I think this is really important. It's been brought forward from November to September. Again, there's still some confusion about what this is. So I wondered, Simon, if you can perhaps give us some insight into what it is and how it impacts us now that it's been brought forward from November to September.
Yes, it's a bit of the Living Wage Foundation wanted to announce the rates earlier. We'll look at the rationale. But Living Wage Foundation is independent government. It's a group of individuals that set up an organisation that wanted to promote people being paid a real living wage, or, because there's more expense in London, a London living wage as well. And they've signed up 11,000 employers so far who pledge to pay at or above these rates. So they're above the government's minimums. And as I say, they announce them usually each November, and then those that claim Living Wage Foundation accreditation or living wage have 6 months to implement them. This year, because of the cost of living, the Living Wage Foundation decided to announce them earlier. I think it's 22nd of September from memory. And these are the rates shown: £10.90, £11.95 for London. And they haven't brought forward, though, the 6-month limit. So the latest Living Wage Foundation accredited employer has is to the 14th of May 2023 to apply these rates without losing their accreditation. It's a voluntary code. It's different to national minimum wage. The judgment point is different. National minimum wage is much more about how much pay is received, whereas the real living wage is much more about what rate is paid. And so you can be a real living wage employer and still be in breach of minimum wage law. That is still possible. And the other aspect of the Living Wage Foundation is they've launched something different called Living Hours. And this is, in effect, to battle the 0 hours worker type things, where the employee works regular 35 hours a week, but is on a 0 hours contract, to have employers promote that they'll actually give regular hours that work for individuals and won't be reliant on 0 hours contractors when actually they're working a lot. Hopefully that's a little bit of help, but this all leads into the real national minimum wage announcements, which we haven't had yet.
Well, I think, assuming this is correct, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong as the expert here, but the real living wage has increased from £10.90 an hour, which is a £1 increase in the UK, and 90 pence an hour to £11.95 for those in London. And you mentioned, Simon, that 11,000 employers have signed up, but actually that impacts 400,000 employees. So it's a massive thing that's impacting a lot of people. And the living wage will support a number of workers and families. But anything you'd like to add there, Sam, before we jump into the national minimum wage differences, so to speak?
No, I think just echoing what Simon said, even if people are an accredited Living Wage Foundation employer, you've still got to be mindful of the regulations and your compliance around the national minimum and the national living wage. Obviously, if you're paying above, hopefully you'd never fall foul of the compliance there, but you've got to always be mindful of the national minimum wage. But yeah, it's voluntary. Again, he's hit the nail on the head, doesn't he?
Often does. So let's talk about Sam, and the impact on payroll. So hopefully people have got to grips now with what the differences are and how it can impact. Of course, we need to be very conscious that it is different, and you want to make sure that you always pay national minimum wage. What's the overall impact on payroll?
I suppose that as part of this cost of living crisis, people, it sounds really obvious, but people are going to get paid more. And, employers want to be investing in their employees right now. And, employers want to be retaining employees. And Nick, I'm sure you're seeing a lot Absolutely. At the minute. in, the retention of staff. And this is something that employers can do that's helping out with the cost of living crisis, financial well-being. It's something that employers can be looking out for as well. Obviously, if you're paying people more, however, you're expecting increased NICs, increased tax. It's those normal things in regards to the effect on payroll. But I think the whole purpose of the Living Wage Foundation is to make sure people are earning a living that they can live on. So, we'd always recommend for people to explore options like this.
Yeah, I know something's been popular in the social groups that I'm part of from a recruitment perspective, from the employment side, is that obviously you're able to gift up to £50, and people have done that through shopping and food cards and things like that, as long as it doesn't go over that level. But are there any other, or either if one of you can either advance on that knowledge, maybe Simon or Sam, but also other things perhaps employers or payroll departments can do to support it that already exist? I think there are some other benefits in terms of the way you commute to work and sharing and other bits as well. In terms of bus routes, I think employers can offer free of charge if you go certain ways. And there's a few things like that. Is there anything there that's worth bringing to the fore for those that perhaps are considering options to help their employees?
I'd say that, if you provide parking at or near a place of work, an employer can provide that free of charge without a taxable benefit. One of our guests today have asked about the employee assistance programs. The welfare counselling side of things is an exempt benefit. There's lots of different things that employers can do, even if they're not a tax-free option. Employers can always add things onto a PSA if they're wanting to look at their financial well-being package that they offer to their employees. Simon, what are your thoughts on that one?
They all sound good. I'm going to say, Sam, you've hit the nail on the head. But is that the expression? There are some challenges around on some of those things, Nick. I don't know what it's like in other counties, but I'll say in the county of Cambridgeshire, where I'm living, there are about 40 bus routes that have been cancelled by a well-known firm of bus providers. And there is an element of thinking, how are people going to get to work? And so that must be a problem for some of those employers. What are those employees going to do? Because they've been travelling for, 15 years to that place of work on that route. And now it's gone and they're in a village. How do they get to work?
Fabulous. Well, let's take it to the next point. I think we've got a few hot topics we're going to try and get through as well. If anyone has any questions on the real living wage, please do pop those in the chat box. Before we jump actually into hot topics, I've also got a question that's coming from Roz, which links back to R35. It says, do you think engagers should still assess deemed employment so they can help contractors maintain compliance, or would you now completely back off?
I'd say it's a personal choice of the end engager.
Yeah.
Sit on the fence. It would be personal choice. There's nothing to say that they have to.
I'd probably say don't do it. It's just a gut feeling I have. You have no requirement to do so. And why would you be entering into a tax advice obligation when you have none now? That's just an initial sort of feeling, Nick. The responsibility's gone elsewhere. It's going to be an interesting time, isn't it?
Don't forget, automatic enrolment defines employees as covered for automatic enrolment and workers. So whoever's working for you, you need to make sure that the relationship, that end engager, the employer, who is the employer, is always going to be a route that the regulator will look at. Is this person employed? So if you're truly self-employed, it's outside of automatic enrolment. Individual limited companies, so one single director, outside automatic enrolment. But if the person is actually providing services personally to that employer, they could be a personal service worker, in which case they would come under automatic enrolment. So the employer should always, or the company, the organisation should always be looking at anyone they've got that are paying either a fee to on invoice, or certainly all employees will be covered. But it's just, they should have that logic anyway. What is the relationship? So bring it back to basics. So if it's a limited company, individual, from a regulator perspective, an employer or an organisation employing a limited company. If it's truly a limited company, they're outside AE. The limited company has duties for the staff that they have, and if it's a single director only company, then it's outside of AE. But if they've got employees, then those employees will come under automatic enrolment duties by that limited company, or directors who are employed could be covered if there's more than one employed director or another employee. So the organisation, just make sure you know what that contractual relationship is. So maybe you do need to check. Not so much the IR35 says thing, but just is this person covered as a worker? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andy. I think that's a general thing, isn't it? The assessed checking is relating to a non-employee, non-worker, of whether they fall under IR35 for tax withholding. The more fundamental question here is, are they really the engager's employee or worker directly? And they're not engaging a business at all, whether they fall under IR35 or not. So are they really trying to pretend they're not their employee when they are? And I think that's the critical layer you're suggesting for pension AE is identify your workers. Yeah. Because an IR35 is not a worker legally under that term. However, some employers and organisations might be disguising those types of people to not fall under the duties when they do.
The ever-reliable Ashley Dorman has also made a comment here to say, and an IR35 deemed employee is more expensive from an employer NIC and apprenticeship levy perspective. Bow out from April 2023 if you can save a few pounds. So thanks for that, Ashley. I always enjoy your commentary with that. They usually get one sort of post every single session, and they're always belters. I like for that. Just building on what Sam mentioned about the parking, I just found a little resource here. So hopefully this is still accurate. Simon or Sam, correct me if I'm wrong. But other things you can supply your employees with the cost of living crisis as it is. You can eat for free, so you can provide free or subsidised meals to your employees at your premises, as long as the food is provided equally to all your employees or all of those working at a particular site. There is no taxable benefit for the workers, so something to consider there. Obviously, the cost of food is going up and the food bank's being used more than ever. Buses to work, we mentioned that slightly before. I know bus routes may not be there for everybody, but if there is a bus to work, then you can provide free or subsidised transport for employees to get to work to help those who struggle to pay for fuel for their cars. A works bus that transports your employees and their children, if required, to and from work can be used for the full journey or part of it when employees are collected from a pickup point. The vehicle must be designed to carry at least 9 passengers, and the service must be available generally to any of your employees. Alternatively, your business could work with the local authorities to subsidise a key bus for your workers to get to and from work. Again, if any of this is incorrect, please do update me. This is a couple of months old, this information. But small loans is another. Many employers will provide a season ticket loan to help employees pay in advance for their commuting costs. But such interest-free loans up to £10,000 can be provided for any reason. The loan must be repayable and the loan agreement should be drawn up. And last but not least, which I mentioned that we've done and other recruiters have done as well, small gifts. Just as directors can receive tax-free gifts worth up to £50 from their company, so can employees. Buying a school uniform for a worker's child or surprising them with a food hamper on their birthday may make a big difference to the family. The 300 annual cap only applies to directors and their family members, not other employees. Is there anything that's worth commenting on that? Or is that pretty accurate as it's come out?
Yeah,
sounds
pretty
good to
accurate.
me.
I'd say your specs as well. If anyone needs to wear specs, eye tests.
Yeah, great point.
3 out of 4 of us are wearing specs today. So, anyone that's working on a computer, employers can cover the cost for that as well.
Super. I think it's really good bringing these things together because not everyone's always aware. And also these little changes, the marginal gains can make a huge impact on people that are struggling. So we've opened up the hot topics here. We talked a little bit about the cost of living, the fuel crisis and financial well-being, but I'm assuming there may be some other elements here we want to just build upon. So I'm going to come back to you here, Simon, because I think this was your point to add to the hot topics. Is there anything here you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, we've discussed a little bit on the 4-day week as well. So fuel crisis, financial well-being. There is a lot of promotion of financial well-being solutions. I don't know if the new pension minister is responsible for it, and you may know or not, but Guy Opperman within his portfolio was also financial inclusion. But of course, he wasn't a Liz Truss supporter, so it's not being carried on. Sorry if that sounds a bit of a funny one, but he was certainly out for the promotion of credit unions and savings schemes, and also there's the scheme that Nest have been involved in, where money's where money is put aside and you need it for emergency use. It's there to be used, but after a period of time, it then funds into the pension scheme for future retirement. And so there is an element of that. And just looking at fees, and it's speaking with a couple of providers, some schemes operational there to enable where the employer pays the fee to the provider to enable short-term obtaining of money on an advanced basis, etc. So there's various options around in relation to financial well-being. But I think people are worrying about things at the moment, especially this week. Since the collapse of the markets, young people trying to buy a house or things like that. How's that going to play out into work? And so I think there's hopefully things settle down very rapidly, maybe even after today. But I think feel like we're in troubled waters.
Although aside from this, doesn't necessarily impact payroll, but of course there has been a really good change to the stamp duty impacts of buying your first property as well, which obviously has increased quite significantly. So hopefully that will help people to buy as well. But I appreciate it's challenging out there for everybody at the moment. Emma's just mentioned as well, something we forgot to add is free flu jabs as well, of course. So that's something that's another benefit that we can all consider. Help people, keep people healthy and working is really, really important. So that's something that we can add into the mix.
Do you think there's more pay on demand requests? Do you think that's going to grow from a payroll operational perspective? That could be really time consuming.
That's a huge question. I think that's probably a webinar all by itself, pay on demand. I mean, Simon might be better to answer that, being in Irene and being part of a systems provider that offers or may well in the future offer those kind of solutions. Certainly there's a lot more coming to the market. I've done podcasts with quite a few of these suppliers, and I get contacted weekly by people, new companies I've never heard of that are now offering pay on demand solutions. So it's definitely seen as a growth market here in the UK. I think I looked at the last CIPP report that look at some of the audience. They reported not many were actually taken up at that point or interested in doing so, but I suspect that will change over time, just because it's happened in the States, it's been adopted elsewhere, and employees tend to rule the roost in what they want now as the consumers and engagers. So if they're demanding it, I think you'll see it come in. But big question. And that's talking completely separately to the payroll implications of doing it, just about what employees want it. And I think we will see it increase. I think it's been slow to adopt.
Well, I think there's an element of what is the future, and I think as a payroll professional, we are a little bit still in cycles. So we like our cycles. So I don't know, on the 6th we collect the tax codes, on the 9th we collect the timesheets. Everyone gets paid on the 25th. And actually, going back 20 or 30 years ago, you probably found yourself, or maybe longer, because I'm bit long in the tooth, you may have found that your mortgage came out on the 1st, whether you wanted it to or not. But nowadays, your mortgage comes out when you choose it to come out. So whether there's an instant or actual access, I don't know. But I think in my head, it's little been, or my dream head for payroll, I think there's an element of pay on demand will become choose when you're paid. I mean, really paid. And we as payroll professionals, could we cope with that? Can our mind cope with that? Or are we still in a monthly cycle of, well, on this day we do this, and on that day we do that? Because if we really go into a pay-on-demand model, a true payroll pay-on-demand model, we'll be paying people every day. There have been a few things on the social discussions, Nick, I've seen, of one or two providers actually starting to offer Monday to Friday, choose your pay.
Yeah,
include Saturday, Sunday. I don't know why, but they could do.
First, it's better than I think sometimes we want change, but there's a lot of talk about the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle, and that sounds great, but in reality, I think actually we like routine, certainly in the UK, and we like routine. We like knowing and arranging and planning for things coming, and suddenly to take that away, I think would be, as much as we think we want it, I think it would shock a lot of people. And actually choice isn't always a good thing. It's a bit like we talked about the flexible working and hybrid working. Hybrid working, in my opinion as a recruiter, is a great thing. I think we've seen a huge adoption of it, and I think it works really well looking at work-life balance. However, I still believe it works best when the hybrid is fixed as to the days you're in the office and the days you're not, as opposed to those that offer come in when you want. Because I may arrange to come in on a Tuesday to meet an employee who's arranged to do the same. Last minute, they change their mind. I'm in the office, they've gone somewhere else, but still, it gets really confusing. I think we do like routine and yeah, I think it works really well if it's planned and there is some structure around it. I think we take away structure, it can be chaos sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I think flexible benefit schemes have sort of gave us the ability to flex as much as we want. I think the reality is, for the majority of us, we choose what we want and we stay with it for some time until something changes. We're not actually dipping in each month and changing our mind. Oh, this month I'll have a bit of medical and the next month I'll have a bit of pension. I think we're making a choice which then is set until we hit something that makes us change our mind. And I think that's the same with other things in life. And I think, is that really where the future is? So I think the cycles will stay, but the individual will choose the cycle. That's where I'd hope it was. And if they want to be fairly random, the capability is there to do either way. Just choose it. But I've got to say, I haven't changed my flex choices for years.
I'll get your opinion on this, Sam, because for me as a recruiter, then if I look at the lower end of the earning scale, those that are national minimum wage, that's where I think pay on demand can have a huge impact, because sometimes you can't afford the bus route to get to work in the first place, or whatever, the fuel to get to work, because you are on the real red line to get there. And I think if you can make that available on a pay on demand for those at the national minimum wage end of the employee market, I think it can be quite a good benefit. But I think watch this space. And Barbara's put out there that pay on demand would be a great topic for next time. So make sure you put that down in the survey that will follow this show, Barbara, and we'll take all the responses in. If others feel the same, put it in the survey and we'll tackle that for sure. Emma Braunton's also mentioned that I've seen a bigger take up on our medical cover. It takes the pressure off. Sam, I can see you nodding, so I'm going to come to you and just see what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you mentioned that you'd taken a look at the Future of Payroll report. I think you put the link in the chat as well, Nick. So thank you for that. Pay on demand, not a lot of people know end to end the full picture. I think it's still very new. I know it's been implemented in the US, and I think a lot of EU countries, it's now law that they have pay on demand. And it's like anything, isn't it? Anything that's new, you need to know the ins and outs before you can make a judgment call on it. And I go to a lot of events where it's the hot topic of conversation. And I think that's because people want to know more about it. Even me, in the role that I'm in, I don't feel like I've got a full end-to-end knowledge to make a judgment call. I think a lot of people's concerns are, if people can get their hands on their salary prior to the contractual payday, is that in the long run going to cause more financial hardship with people not budgeting, withdrawing your cash down? And what then if, for example, someone has a gambling addiction and they withdraw all their money, and then come the end of the month they haven't got the money to pay their rent or their mortgage? There's got to be some sort of regulation around it to stop financial hardship. If it's all works in favour of helping people financially, hesitant because I don't know the full picture from this side of things.
Yeah. I know a lot of suppliers that offer it can and employers can choose to fix how much of wages are actually paid on demand. So it's not always the whole amount. It may fix it at just 20% of the full amount and things like that. So there are some flexible arrangements around it. I think what's really interesting, and you must see the CIPP as well, is most of the talks we're seeing, and they are they're everywhere now, webinars on pay on demand. 9 times out of 10, though, those webinars are delivered by the software providers that are providing it. So it's really interesting to hear from someone like yourself, Sam, and others that aren't actually representative of one of the providers, and getting that perspective. And I think Barbara's absolutely right. It'd be an interesting topic for the future. Maybe we can get a software provider that does offer it on the show as well to get their perspective. And everyone seems to do it slightly differently, and that kind of bamboozles you further. Every solution that I've seen offers it in a slightly different way, and there's concerns about whether it's a loan, whether it's not, and this, that, and the other. And There's a bit of a minefield for information. And Dodd has just posted, you have to be careful with giving employee flu jabs. So apologies, I've made this as an error in my statement. If employees claim it back through expenses, it is taxable as earnings.
Yeah, it has to be employer provided, has to be provided by the employer rather than a reimbursement.
So glad you mentioned that. Fantastic. I think that's covered all of our questions. So we are going to be back with PQT on October the 21st. If you have any further questions, you can put them in the chat box right now. If there's anything else you'd like us to cover off next time, such as pay on demand, then please do let us know. Barbara's just said yes. Again, it'd be great to have this in. We're trialling it at the moment. So having that talked about on the next PQT would be perfect. Thank you, Barbara, for that information. Thank you for everyone for getting involved in the questions and in the polls. We look forward to bringing you the next episode of PQT on October the 21st. Registrations will open soon. I'll put a quick link in the chat box so you can access that and save it in your folders or your bookmarks. And we look forward to joining you all October 21st. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Nick. Bye, guys.
Bye all. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment. If you need help with a current payroll vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favourite podcast channels. Till next time.